In this video, we're going to take a look at the work breakdown structure in Microsoft Project. This is a look at a completed work breakdown structure and schedule that we will build. I'll build some of it on this video, and then some of it I'll do offline because it does take a little bit of time. But one big advantage of putting the work breakdown structure in Project is that Project has some really awesome reporting around things like cost variance and schedule variance, earned value analysis, and resource allocation. And by putting it all here in Project, it's not just like we're putting together a spreadsheet, but we're feeding data into that model. So on the left, you see all of the work packages that we're going to do as part of this work breakdown structure. We have some summary tasks that are collapsible. We have some work packages that are under the summary tasks. And then we have some milestones as well. And we can set up some dependencies, we can set up durations, and that effectively automatically draws the schedule that we have on the right side of the pane. So task types, as I mentioned, summary. Summary tasks will include other tasks. I kind of think as a summary similar to an epic that we'd see in Jira or any other kind of Scrum tool, where it's like, okay, here's a big task, and then it has several member tasks that can be decomposed underneath it. Those member tasks are just called tasks. And then a milestone is similar to a milestone that we'd see in either Waterfall or Agile. So GitHub projects or Jira or any of the other tools. It says, okay, we want to set a release here. It could be something like right at the end of the quarter or something like that, where we say, okay, this is where we're going to target our release, and this is what we're planning to be in that release. So a few options I have here. If I want to do a summary task, I can simply click like so, and I can say something like foundation. And you notice that it brings up that little box with some other information we can add, like predecessors, resources we can assign to it. We'll need to define some resources first. Constraint type, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Work breakdown structure mode. Any other notes and any other custom fields that we want. But you notice that it kind of starts with this foundation task, and then underneath we have new task, which is just a normal work breakdown structure package. It's something that we want to do. So foundation is, okay, let's form a norm. Let's put the team together. A good foundational task would be define our definition of done. Define our definition of ready. Create GitHub repository. So then at this point we meet with our experts and we say, okay, well, how long is this going to take? Definition of done, probably 1 day. And you notice as soon as I add that, it updates the foundation summary task and says, okay, that's going to take about a day. Definition of ready, maybe that's a day as well. And create GitHub repository, maybe that's 2 days. And so you see that now the foundational task updates to effectively the critical path, or the longest task, which is 2 days. Now, if we say that we can't create the GitHub repository until we have our definition of ready, then we can assign a predecessor here and say, well, this has a predecessor of 3. Now watch what's going to happen to that summary task. You see the summary task says, okay, well, I'm now 3 days because my critical path now effectively is 1 day plus 2 days. And if we take a look over here, we can see that it's starting to put together our chart, our Gantt chart, with a bit of sequencing. And this item up here, define our definition of done, it says, well, I don't really know where this one goes because it doesn't have a predecessor or successor. So I'm just going to say it can go anywhere here. Okay, now we've done our foundation. We want to start thinking about the work that we're going to do. And the example that I'm using here is, say, my plant diary, where we can catalog the plants that we have in our yard and when we've cared for the plants, any type of fertilizer we've done, or any other amendments we've done to the plant. So I need an API for that, so I'm going to say, okay, create specimen API, where a specimen is a specific plant you can touch. Well, oh shoot, wait, no, I want this to be a summary task. I don't want it to be under foundation. Well, no worries. All we need to do is outdent the task, like so. And you notice then it says, okay, I'm as far left as I can, but I'm still a task. Okay, I'm not a summary task yet. Well, a summary task is typically going to have some work breakdown structure packages as children of it. Let's see how we can set this up. I'll say create contract. So a contract is, in the land of an API, it says, okay, this is what I expect to receive, and this is the response that I will give back. So it's a contract between the end user and the service itself. Definitely part of that API and something that we would do early. But wait a minute. This is now just a task, as is create specimen API, until we indent. And now take a look. Now it says create contract as a child of create specimen API. And once again, it's summarizing up as 0 days until we add however long we think it will take to create a contract. Maybe that's 8 hours worth of work. And now we see that project was smart enough to say, okay, 8 hours is 1 day, so create specimen API is 1 day. Let me go ahead and fill in a few more details. I'll pause the video while I do this. I've added several more tasks, and I've also added a milestone. You see the milestone has this little diamond shape, and that says, okay, this is a delivery that we want to make. Maybe we're going to say we're going to make that milestone mid-June, so I can go ahead and plop this out here. But it did do something a little bit funny there that I need to correct. When I created this milestone and gave it a date, it started the create specimen API at that date, which is not what I want. I want it to be when the specimen API is complete. So what I'm going to do is outdent this to make it no longer a child of create specimen API. And then I'm going to give it a prereq of that specimen API. And I'm going to modify the start date of create specimen API back to the date on which I'm recording this video. There we go. So now you can see that we have our tasks here, and we need to do a bit of sequencing because they're all showing as starting as the first day. And then if we go to the right a little bit, we'll see that we have our milestone defined here. So effectively, we can start working towards that date and figuring out, okay, what is it that we need to hit that date. I'll go ahead and add a few prerequisites so this makes a bit more sense. Create database. We're going to need an entity relationship diagram before we create the database, so I'll say 7. And you see now it's starting to fill in some dates for us. Create JSON endpoint controller. Well, we're going to need a database for that before we can actually deploy. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's do 8 there. Create service, which I misspelled. That's going to require a database as well, so I might give that an 8. And looks like it has a bit of a constraint here. It looks like it's stuck on the 6 days we initially proposed. So I'm going to say auto schedule. And notice that that updates and it takes the red lines away. It simply says, okay, let me look at the dependencies we've put together and let me automatically schedule them and compute the date. So here we see on our chart that we have our prerequisite, and then which is design the ERD, and then create the database, and then create the database has two, it's a prerequisite to 2 other activities, and that draws out some lines and also lets us sequence our work. So I can continue to do this. I'm going to continue to enhance this a little bit because we're going to use this as a model as we're doing things like earned value. But you see it's fairly easy to put together one of these work breakdown structures in Gantt charts. And then we can double click and we can add a whole lot more information here. And what information do we want to add? Very similar to Scrum, where we have a story and we have attributes in there. We want to add similar attributes for a work breakdown structure. And what's going to guide us in that are a lot of the templates and the guidance from the PMBOK. So milestone, we talked about this earlier. Milestone typically has no duration, and it says, okay, this is when we're going to have a deliverable. We can set goals for that. We can monitor that. And then that's typically a time we're going to look for customer sign-off that we did indeed meet the goals of that milestone. Predecessors, we talked about this one. So you notice that we can have a task with 1 predecessor, multiple predecessors, or no predecessors. And that helps us to draw out this chart. And really when we draw that chart out and we start looking at when these activities are happening, we can start looking at risk. What if we have a 3-month project that starts December 1st? That's going to hit a lot of holidays. What if we have a 3-month project that starts May 15th? We're probably also going to hit some vacation time. Okay, what if I have a big project that starts on April 1st, lasts 30 days? Probably not a big deal unless I'm the IRS, right? So we can look at important dates, both things that happen in the outside world and things that happen internally once we have this mapped out. Another big thing we can look at, which is important if you're a project manager, are any constrained resources. So if we have a subject matter expert and this person is the only person in our company who knows how to answer this question or do this task, let's put out a chart like this and make sure that person is available when needed, because odds are that person might be pulled into other projects. Maybe it's a principal engineer on our team or somebody who knows cybersecurity really well or one of those specialized skills. And we want to make sure that that person's available and not pulled into another project. If not, the risk is that that one person could put our project at risk. One of the attributes we can set in Microsoft Project is the type of relationship between predecessor and successor tasks. So predecessor, a task that's required before our task can start. Successor, a task that will start after our task is complete. The most common is finish to start. So successor cannot start until the predecessor has finished. This is common in a scenario that I give a lot where we're designing a mobile app and mobile app developers are mostly doing user interface development, and they're dependent on an API or a service that's being called behind the scenes, probably hosted on the cloud somewhere. Ideally, we'll say, well, we can't start on the user experience until that API is complete. So that would be finish to start. Finish to finish is another interesting one. Successor cannot finish until the predecessor is finished. Don't see this one a whole lot, but the example I gave in a separate video about an apartment building that was built next to the building I live in, that's a good example of a finish to finish. They need a certificate of occupancy before they can start moving people in. So that has to be finished before move-in. But to get a certificate of occupancy, all of the work that makes that building habitable has to be finished before the certificate of occupancy can be finished. So I think we'll see that a lot in that kind of permitting scenario. Start to start, successor cannot start until predecessor has finished. Successor cannot start until predecessor has started. Okay, we could maybe pivot the example I gave for finish to start a little bit. Let's say that we want to create our MyPlant Diary application. And for that, we need our API and we need our front end. Well, earlier I said the front end can't start until the back end is finished. But what if we want to maybe compress the schedule a little bit and say, okay, you two could work in parallel, right? You could create a contract from the service that the user experience is going to consume, and then both of you can work in parallel. But we need both of you to start at the same time so that you can agree on this contract first. So that would be a start to start. And there's still a predecessor-successor relationship there because the UI could not be complete until the API itself is complete. So those two do have to go in sequence even though they start relatively at the same time. Start to finish is a tricky one to think of an example of. So successor cannot finish until predecessor is started. But consider this. I'm buying a new car, and a new truck, and I want to get the tailgate extender on the truck. Okay, so that's the successor activity because I have to buy the truck first. But I do have to buy the truck for that tailgate extender to be on there. And on the same note, I'm not comfortable signing that I'm going to buy the truck until I know that the tailgate extender has been put on, or at least they've started work on it. So what happens is the salesperson tells me, okay, I've sent the truck back to the shop. They're installing the tailgate extender now. How about you go ahead and sign this contract? That would be a good example of a start to finish. Similar with maybe a build to suit operation or moving into something where you're signing a lease and you say, well, okay, I like this, retail outlet, or I like this apartment or office space, but there's a chip in the paint here that needs to be fixed, or there's a window that's cracked that needs to be replaced. So I'll sign the lease, but after you've started this repair work for me. So that's kind of a tricky one, but that's what I would consider a start. So dependencies. When we're thinking of sequencing activities, we need to think about dependencies and how those will play into that sequencing. So we really have several categories, but here are 4 that are important. Mandatory dependencies are legally or contractually required. Did we get the permits to close 4th Street to bring a crane in? You know, that would be a mandatory dependency because we can't just bring a crane downtown and block a road. Now, we also have discretionary dependencies, the ones that the example that I've given a lot where we say, okay, we really would like to have the API complete before we start working on the front end. Because we have some certainty there. We know what the API is going to look like. We know the contract for sure. So that's something we prefer. Now, on the other hand, the project starts to run a little bit behind schedule and we need to make some changes there. Okay, can we run these tasks parallel? Well, we can. We don't like to, but we can. Why do we not like to run them parallel? Well, as good a job as we do defining that contract up front, guess what? As an API is getting developed, they'll occasionally realize that the shape is wrong. Maybe we need to send more data over here, or maybe this should be capitalized. Maybe it was an enumeration. We want to change it to an array. So these things tend to happen, which means there's going to be rework for that user experience team. So preferred is complete. We can work with them without that dependency. You know, we can work in parallel without that discretionary dependency, but it might create more rework for us. External dependencies, these are things that are outside of our team's control. So we are just the front end app developers, and the API is written by another group. The data storage mechanism is written by another group, so we are dependent on them. That means we are also dependent on their schedules and on their constraints. And if that's the case, we need visibility into their project to know if they're running behind, because that will impact us. So where do we get that visibility? A lot of times that's what a program manager will do. A program manager is looking across an entire project and all of its dependencies and keeping close tabs on any dates that might be at risk. So that's external dependency. Internal dependency, those are dependencies within the team's control, things that we can change if needed, or at least we can swap around our own priorities. Finally, lead and lag, these are things that we can add into our schedule. So lead time says the successor activity can be advanced with respect to a predecessor. In other words, we can get an early start on this. And this works well with a finish to start dependency. So, okay, we're fairly confident the API has gone well, and we're ready to go ahead and start the user experience at that point. So that would be a finish to start. Lag time, amount of time a successor activity will be delayed with respect to a predecessor. So in this case, maybe we are building the Brent Spence Bridge, the replacement Brent Spence Bridge. We need to drive some piers into the Ohio River, and it's going to take a little time for that concrete to set. So the actual work might be 3 months, but for the concrete to cure, and when it cure, it sets off heat, so we need it to cure and cool, maybe that's a 2-week process. Or similar, we do a primer coat on the steel. That might take 5 days, but then maybe 2 days to make sure it's dried completely before we apply the overcoat. So that's where we might have a bit of lag time. Fairly easy to set up in project. Notice here we have create database task, which is waiting for the design entity relationship diagram to be complete. I double click on it and notice I can give it lag time. So let's give it 5 days lag time. And you notice that now it shifts out its start for 5 days. Maybe once the ERD is defined, we want to give it 5 days for comments. So that's an example where we will give it a lag time. Now you notice that set off my other tasks here, that create JSON endpoint controller and create service. So I'll just go up here and say auto schedule, or maybe I can come down to these tasks and say auto schedule, and boom, there we go. Now the schedule has adjusted. Now let's take a look at create JSON endpoint controller. And note that we have a lag of 0 days. What if I put in -2 days? And you notice that it backs up a little bit. You notice it says, okay, well, I'm still a successor of create database. However, I'm able to start 2 days earlier. And create database we have is 2 days, so it effectively pushed that to the beginning, which wasn't exactly what I was going for. But you see, we could finagle this any way we want. You see, here we have an update. It says our predecessor is, for create database, is design entity relationship diagram, finish to start, plus 5 days lag time. Now down here we have create JSON endpoint controller. So the predecessor is create database, finish to start. Lag time is -2 days, which is effectively lead time of 2 days. What if I just said, okay, yeah, maybe that was a bit aggressive. Maybe I want to say 1 day. Sure enough, I can change it there. And if you look over here to the right, you notice that our dependency has changed. So that's a look at the work breakdown structure and Gantt chart, tasks, including summary task, task and milestone, in Microsoft Project, and how we can use that to start setting up our project. This is the start of making our project and being able to do analysis on the project so that we can do things like control scope and also look at the status of the project, which is where we as project managers are going to be spending a lot of our time as the project executes. So as always, I hope you found this video helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.